Katina Pisano pressed her fingertips into the cool marble wall of the hallway, her ankle throbbing with a pain so savage it felt like broken glass grinding into bone with every shallow breath she took. The crystal sconces lining the corridor blurred into halos of molten gold through the rising sting of tears. Yet she forced herself to blink them back, to swallow the sob clawing up her throat. She would not let him see her shatter. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's go back to hours before, where it all started. 6 months ago, she had been someone else entirely. 6 months ago, she had been free. The memory came to her unbidden as she slid down the wall, her damaged leg finally giving out beneath her. She remembered the rain that night, the way it had hammered against the windows of her father's study in their family estate outside Milan. She had been visiting for the weekend, taking a break from her training schedule at the athletic facility where she worked as a personal trainer. Her father, Senator Antonio Pisano, had been hosting one of his usual gatherings, the kind where men in expensive suits spoke in hushed tones about matters she had learned not to ask about. She had gone downstairs for water. That was all. Just water. But the door to her father's private office had been slightly ajar, and through it she had seen something that would cost her everything. Fabio Fiorentini had been there, his imposing frame filling the space like a storm cloud. Across from him sat her father, his hands trembling as he signed document after document. And on the floor between them, bleeding onto the antique Persian rug, had been Councilman Ricci, a man she had known since childhood. A man who was supposed to testify before Parliament the following week about construction fraud and laundered money. She must have made a sound, some small gasp of horror, because Fabio's steel blue eyes had snapped to the doorway. He had seen her, and in that instant, she had understood with terrifying clarity that her life as she knew it had ended. What happened next had been swift and clinical. Fabio had walked out of the study, closed the door behind him, and smiled at her with the warmth of a serpent. He had taken her phone from her hand as easily as if she were a child. He had called to his men, who materialized from the shadows of her own home like ghosts. And then he had explained, in that calm, unhurried voice she had come to dread, exactly what was going to happen. She would come with him. She would live in his villa. She would appear at his side when required, a symbol of legitimacy and refinement, proof that even the daughter of a senator chose to associate with Fabio Fiorentini. She would smile. She would be gracious. She would be the perfect picture of willing companionship. And if she refused, if she tried to run, if she whispered even a single word about what she had seen, Councilman Ricci would not be the only body discovered in the Naviglio Grande Canal. Her father had done nothing. He had stood in the doorway of his study, his face ashen, and watched as Fabio's men escorted her to the car. She had called out to him, begged him to help her, but Antonio Pisano had simply turned away and closed the door. That had been the last time she had seen her father. Now she lived in a prison disguised as paradise. The villa sprawled across 5 acres of manicured grounds, its architecture a masterpiece of old-world elegance and modern security. Every room was more beautiful than the last, with soaring ceilings, priceless art adorning the walls, and furniture that belonged to museums. Marble floors gleamed beneath her feet. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across hand-painted frescoes. The gardens were immaculate, the staff impeccable, the wine cellar legendary. But beauty was just another kind of cage when you could not leave it. Cameras watched her from every corner. She had counted them in her first week, mapping their angles and blind spots with the methodical precision her athletic training had taught her. 47 cameras throughout the main house. 32 more scattered across the grounds. Motion sensors on every door and window. Guards stationed at the gates, on the perimeter walls, patrolling the gardens at all hours. Fabio had thought of everything. The staff would not help her. She had tried, in those early days, to find an ally among the housekeepers, the gardeners, the chef. But they had all looked at her with the same expression of mingled pity and terror before turning away. They knew what happened to people who crossed Fabio Fiorentini. They had seen the consequences. So had she. 2 months into her captivity, a young guard named Luca had shown her kindness. He had smiled at her when no one was looking, slipped her an apple from the kitchen when she had been denied dinner as punishment for missing one of Fabio's events due to a migraine. Small gestures, insignificant really, but they had felt like oxygen to a drowning woman. Fabio had noticed. Luca had disappeared the next day. The staff whispered that he had been transferred to another assignment, but Katina had seen the fear in their eyes. She had heard the gunshot in the night, distant but unmistakable, echoing across the grounds like thunder. After that, no one looked at her at all. Katina pressed her forehead against the cool marble now, the pain in her ankle a constant, savage reminder of how completely she had lost control of her own body, her own life. The villa stretched around her in all directions, vast and suffocating, every beautiful surface reflecting back her own trapped face. 36 hours until the Marconi Gala. 36 hours to either surrender completely or find a way to reclaim the smallest fragment of her stolen freedom. But as the pain pulsed through her shattered ankle and the cameras watched her from their silent corners, Katina could not imagine how either option was even possible anymore. The memory of how it happened came back to her in fragments, sharp and jagged, like the bone she was certain had broken. 3 nights ago, the service stairwell. She had been returning from the kitchen after a sleepless night, seeking water, when she had heard the voices rising from the lower level. Angry voices. Men arguing in rapid Italian about shipments, about territory, about respect. She should have turned back. She should have retreated to her room and pretended she had heard nothing. But her athlete's curiosity, that damned instinct to assess every situation, had drawn her closer to the railing. She had peered down just enough to see them. 3 men she recognized as Fabio's capos, and one she did not. A stranger with slicked silver hair and a scar running down his left cheek, his finger jabbing the air as he shouted about Fabio's weakness, about distractions, about a woman who made the boss soft. He had been talking about her. Fiorentini keeps her like a pet, the scar man had snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. Parades her around like she makes him legitimate. She makes him weak. She makes us all weak. One of the capos had tried to calm him, to reason with him, but the stranger had been beyond reasoning. His rage had filled the stairwell like poison gas. And then, as if sensing her presence, he had looked up. Their eyes had met. Katina had frozen, her hand gripping the cold metal railing. For 1 heartbeat, 2, neither of them had moved. Then his face had twisted into something feral, and he had started up the stairs. She had run. Her legs, strong from years of training, had carried her up the stone steps too, at time. But he had been faster, driven by fury and decades of violence. She had felt his hand close around her shoulder just as she reached the landing, spinning her around with such force that her feet had left the ground. "You want to spy on us, Principessa?" he had hissed, his breath hot and rank against her face. "Let me teach you what happens to pretty things who see too much." She had tried to fight him. God, she had tried. Her fist had connected with his jaw, his ribs, her knee driving toward his groin the way she had been taught in self-defense classes years ago. But he had been a professional, a man who had hurt people for a living long before she was born. He had caught her leg mid-strike and twisted it with brutal precision. The sound of her ankle breaking had been sickeningly loud in the narrow stairwell. A crack like a branch snapping, followed immediately by a pain so absolute, so consuming, that her vision had gone white. She had collapsed, her scream trapped in her throat as shock flooded her system. He had not been finished. He had grabbed her by the hair, dragged her 3 steps down, and then released her. She had tumbled the rest of the way, her body hitting the stone steps again and again until she had landed in a broken heap at the bottom. Her ankle had been bent at an unnatural angle, already swelling, the pain radiating up her leg in waves that made her stomach heave. The scarred man had stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at her with satisfaction. "Now you look like what you really are," he had said. Broken. The other capos had stared at her in horror, but none of them had moved to help. They had simply scattered like rats fleeing a sinking ship, disappearing into the shadows of the villa. She had lain there alone, fighting to remain conscious, fighting not to vomit from the pain, when Fabio had finally arrived. She had expected rage. She had expected him to punish the man who had touched his property, to defend her out of some twisted sense of ownership. But when Fabio had looked down at her crumpled form at the bottom of the stairs, his steel-blue eyes had held only cold calculation. "Get her to her room," he had said to the guards who materialized behind him. "Clean this up. I want every trace of blood gone in 10 minutes. "Sir," one of the guards had ventured carefully, "should we call a doctor?" "Her ankle is sprained," Fabio had interrupted, his voice sharp as a blade. "She tripped. She was careless. That is the only story that exists. Do you understand me?" The guards had nodded quickly, terrified. Fabio had crouched down beside her then, his hand gripping her chin with just enough pressure to make her gasp. "You fell," he had whispered, his face inches from hers. "You were tired, you missed a step, and you fell. That is what you will say if anyone asks. That is the truth. Because if any other version of this story reaches the wrong ears, if anyone thinks for one moment that my home is not perfectly secure, that my authority is questioned under my own roof, then I will make sure you never walk again. Not on crutches, not in a wheelchair, never. Do you understand me, Katina?" She had nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. He had stood, smoothed his jacket, and walked away without looking back. And she had been carried to her room, her ankle left untreated, the pain growing more savage with each passing hour. Because Fabio Fiorentini's image was worth more than her bones. His reputation was worth more than her ability to ever walk properly again. That had been 3 nights ago. Now, sitting broken on the marble floor, Katina understood with perfect clarity that her life had never been her own. And unless something changed, unless someone intervened, it never would be. The sound of wheels against marble announced the arrival of the wheelchair before Katina saw it. Maria, the older housekeeper, appeared around the corner, her face carefully composed into the same neutral mask every staff member wore in this house. Behind her walked a woman Katina had never seen before, and the sight of her made something tight in Katina's chest loosen just slightly. The woman was in her mid-30s, Middle Eastern, with sharp, intelligent dark eyes and black hair pulled back into a neat bun. She wore a navy blazer over scrubs, a stethoscope draped around her neck, as she carried a leather medical bag with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. But it was her expression that caught Katina's attention. Unlike the staff, unlike the guards, unlike anyone else in this villa, she was looking directly at Katina with something that resembled actual concern. "Signorina Pisano," Maria said quietly, helping Katina into the wheelchair with gentle hands. "This is Dr. Lena Ferry. She has been called to examine your injury." Dr. Ferry nodded, her gaze already moving to Katina's swollen ankle with clinical precision. "Let's get you somewhere more comfortable," she said, her voice calm and professional, carrying the faint accent of someone who had learned Italian as a second language. "Can you tell me when the pain started?" 3 days ago, Katina managed, her voice hoarse from suppressed crying. Something flickered in Dr. Ferry's eyes, something that looked like alarm quickly masked by professional composure. 3 days? And you're only now being examined. Maria pushed the wheelchair forward before Katina could answer, guiding them through the villa's corridors toward the east wing. Dr. Ferry walked alongside them, her expression growing more troubled with each step. They passed beneath crystal chandeliers and priceless paintings, through hallways that belonged in architectural magazines, but the doctor seemed to see none of it. Her attention remained fixed on Katina's ankle, on the unnatural angle, on the swelling that had turned the skin a mottled purple-black. The medical room in the East Wing was small but well-equipped, more like a private clinic than a first-aid station. Maria helped transfer Katina to the examination table, then retreated to stand by the door, her hands folded, her eyes on the floor. One of Fabio's guards took position in the hallway, just outside, close enough to hear everything, close enough to report back. Dr. Ferry washed her hands methodically, then approached the examination table. "I'm going to need to remove your sock and examine the ankle directly," she said gently. "This may hurt." "Everything hurts," Katina whispered. The doctor's hands were careful, expert, but even the lightest touch sent lightning bolts of agony through Katina's leg. She bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood, refusing to cry out with the guard so close. Dr. Ferry worked in focused silence, her fingers probing the swollen tissue, testing range of motion, watching Katina's face for reactions. After several long minutes, Dr. Ferry straightened and met Katina's eyes. For just a moment, something passed between them. Understanding, recognition, the unspoken acknowledgement that they both knew this was no simple fall. The door opened before either of them could speak. Fabio Ferrantini entered the room with the commanding presence of a man who owned everything he surveyed, his steel blue eyes moving from Katina to the doctor with cold assessment. He was dressed impeccably as always, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his slicked back hair without a single strand out of place. The tribal tattoos on his left arm were just visible beneath his rolled cuff, a reminder of the violence that lived beneath the refined exterior. "Dr. Ferry," he said, his voice smooth as silk over steel. "Your assessment?" Dr. Ferry turned to face him, and Katina watched the doctor's posture shift almost imperceptibly. She stood straighter, her expression carefully neutral, but her hands had clenched slightly at her sides. "Signor Fiorentini, I need to be direct with you. This is not a simple sprain." "No." Fabio's tone was mild, almost conversational, but Katina heard the warning beneath it. "No." The ankle shows signs of significant trauma. Multiple fractures, possibly displaced. The swelling and discoloration indicate this injury occurred days ago and has been left completely untreated. Dr. Ferry's voice remained professional, but there was steel in it now. "This young woman needs immediate imaging and likely surgery. Without proper treatment, she could suffer permanent damage. She may never walk normally again." Fabio was silent for a long moment, his eyes locked on the doctor's face. Then he smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Katina had ever seen. "I see. And your professional recommendation is?" "Hospital. Immediately. X-rays, possibly CT scan, consultation with an orthopedic surgeon." "No hospitals," Fabio interrupted quietly. "You will treat her here. You will write in your report that Signorina Pisano suffered a moderate sprain from a fall 3 days ago. You will prescribe rest, ice, elevation, and whatever pain medication you deem appropriate. You will clear her for light activity within 48 hours. She has an important event to attend." Dr. Ferry stared at him, and Katina watched the color drain from the doctor's face as she understood exactly what was being asked of her. "Signor Fiorentini, I cannot in good conscience." "Doctor," Fabio's voice cut through her protest like a knife. "You will write the report I have described. You will sign it, and you will discuss this with no one. In return, you will be compensated generously for your time and your discretion. These are not negotiable terms. Do you understand?" The room fell into suffocating silence. Katina could see the war playing out behind Dr. Ferry's eyes. Professional ethics battling against self-preservation. The truth battling against the lie Fabio demanded. She watched the doctor's jaw tighten, watched her hands clench and unclench at her sides. Finally, Dr. Ferry spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "I understand what you're asking me to do." "Excellent." Fabio glanced at his watch. "You have 10 minutes to complete your examination and documentation. Maria will show you out when you're finished." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Dr. Ferry? I trust one don't need to explain what happens to people who fail to maintain appropriate confidentiality. You seem like an intelligent woman." He left without waiting for a response, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Dr. Ferry stood frozen for a moment, staring at the closed door. Then she turned back to Katina, and their eyes met. In that look, Katina saw something she had not seen in 6 months. She saw someone who understood, someone who knew she was trapped, someone who recognized the lie for exactly what it was. The doctor moved to the desk in the corner and pulled out a prescription pad and report form. Her hand hovered over the paper for a long moment before she began to write. Katina watched her fill out the falsified report, each word a betrayal of everything the doctor had sworn to uphold. A moderate sprain, a simple fall, rest, and elevation recommended. Cleared for light activity in 48 hours. All eyes, every single word. But when Dr. Ferry approached the examination table to fit a simple compression bandage around Katina's devastated ankle, her hands moved with deliberate care. And as she worked, she leaned close, her voice dropping to barely a whisper that the guard in the hallway could not possibly hear. "This is not over," Dr. Ferry breathed, her dark eyes boring into Katina's with fierce intensity. "Do you understand me? This is not over." Then she straightened, returned to her professional demeanor, and finished securing the bandage that would do absolutely nothing to heal the shattered bones beneath. She packed her bag, collected her falsified report, and left the room without looking back. But as Maria wheeled Katina back through the villa's gleaming corridors toward her room, Katina held onto those whispered words like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Someone knew the truth. Someone saw what Fabio was doing to her. And maybe, just maybe, someone was going to help. The hope felt dangerous, fragile as spider silk, and Katina tried not to let it take root too deeply as Maria wheeled her back to her room. Hope in this place was a liability. Hope made you careless. She had learned that lesson with Luca, the young guard who had shown her kindness and paid for it with his life. But as Maria helped her from the wheelchair onto her bed, settling pillows beneath her damaged ankle with unexpected gentleness, Katina could not quite extinguish the small flame Dr. Ferry's words had lit inside her chest. "Rest now, Signorina," Maria murmured, pulling the curtains closed against the afternoon sun. "I will bring your dinner at 7. The door clicked shut, leaving Katina alone in the suffocating silence of her gilded cage. Her room was beautiful, of course. Everything in Fabio's villa was beautiful. The four-poster bed with its silk sheets, the antique furniture, the original artwork on the walls. But beauty meant nothing when you were a prisoner. She spent the next hours drifting in and out of fevered sleep, the pain in her ankle a constant, gnawing presence that medication could barely touch. Each time she woke, her eyes went automatically to the cameras mounted in the upper corners of the room, their red lights blinking steadily. Always watching, always recording. When Maria returned at 7 with a covered dinner tray, Katina had no appetite. But the housekeeper set it on the bedside table with unusual care, arranging the napkin just so, adjusting the water glass twice before stepping back. "Eat what you can, Signorina," Maria said, her voice carrying the same neutral tone as always. But her eyes, just for a fraction of a second, flicked meaningfully toward the tray before she turned and left the room. Katina stared at the covered dishes, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. Slowly, wincing at the pain in her ankle, she reached for the tray and pulled it closer. She lifted the silver dome covering the main plate. Pasta, bread, nothing unusual. She moved the bread aside, then the napkin, and there, tucked beneath the folded linen, was a phone. It was small, cheap, the kind you could buy with cash at any convenience store. A burner, untraceable. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, glancing instinctively at the cameras. But they could not see beneath the tray's angle, could not see what her body shielded as she turned slightly away. The phone was already on, its screen dim to conserve battery. There was one number saved in the contacts, labeled only with the letter F. And there was a message waiting. Katina opened it with shaking fingers. Multiple displaced fractures, ligament damage. Without surgery within the next 48 hours, permanent disability is likely. He is lying to you. He is letting you be destroyed. This is Dr. Ferry. I took an oath to do no harm. I will not let him break you. Trust me. Tomorrow night, 2 a.m., South Garden Wall near the fountain. A vehicle will be waiting. Bring nothing. Tell no one. Delete this message after reading. I will get you out. Katina read the message 3 times, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. It was real. Someone was actually trying to help her. Dr. Ferry had not been bluffing, had not been offering empty comfort. She had a plan. Tomorrow night, 2 in the morning, the South Garden Wall. Her mind raced through the logistics, her athlete's brain automatically calculating distances, timing, routes. The South Garden was at least 200 meters from her room. She would have to navigate stairs, cross through the main hallway, exit through the conservatory. All of it monitored, all of it patrolled, and she could barely walk. But what choice did she have? Stay here and let Fabio parade her around on a shattered ankle until it healed wrong, until she limped for the rest of her life, a permanent reminder of his absolute control? Or take this one desperate chance at freedom, at healing, at reclaiming some fragment of her stolen life? Her thumb hovered over the delete button. Once she erased this message, there would be no evidence, no proof that Dr. Ferry had ever contacted her. But there would also be no turning back. She would be committed to this path, to this risk, to trusting a woman she had met only hours ago. Katina thought of Luca. She thought of her father turning away as she was dragged from his home. She thought of the scarred man's hands on her, the sound of her bone breaking, Fabio's cold eyes as he ordered her injury covered up and ignored. She deleted the message. Then she tucked the phone beneath her mattress, pulled the dinner tray back over her lap, and forced herself to eat mechanically, her mind already working through every detail of tomorrow night's escape. The cameras watched her eat. The villa settled into its evening rhythms around her. And somewhere beyond these walls, Dr. Lena Ferry was preparing to risk everything to save a woman she barely knew. Katina lay back against her pillows as darkness fell outside her window, her damaged ankle throbbing in time with a racing heart. 28 hours. She had 28 hours to prepare, to gather her strength, to steel herself for what might be her only chance at freedom, or her last mistake. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Katina barely slept, her mind cycling through every possible scenario, every potential failure point. She memorized the guard rotation patterns she had observed over months of captivity. She calculated how long it would take to reach the south garden wall, factoring in her injured ankle. She rehearsed the route in her mind until she could see every turn, every doorway, every camera angle. By the time twilight bled into full darkness the following evening, her nerves were wound so tight she thought she might shatter from the tension alone. She forced herself to eat the dinner Maria brought, to maintain the appearance of normalcy. She watched the clock on her nightstand tick toward 2 in the morning with the focus of an athlete waiting for the starting gun. At 1:30, she retrieved the burner phone from beneath her mattress and checked it one final time. No new messages. The plan remained unchanged. South Garden Wall, 2 a.m. She tucked the phone into the waistband of her dark leggings, pulled on a black sweater, and waited. At 1:50, she eased herself out of bed, biting back a gasp as her ankle screamed in protest. She had spent the day testing her weight on it, pushing through the pain to see what she could endure. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it would have to be. The villa at night was a different creature than during the day. Shadows pooled in corners where crystal chandeliers no longer blazed. The marble floors gleamed like ice in the pale moonlight filtering through tall windows. Katina moved through the corridors with the stealth her athletic training had given her, keeping to the walls, avoiding the camera's direct lines of sight. Her ankle threatened to buckle with every step. Sweat gathered at her temples, her lower back. But she pushed forward, driven by 6 months of captivity, by rage, by the desperate, clawing need to be free. She made it to the conservatory without incident. Through its glass walls, she could see the gardens stretching into darkness, the south wall visible in the distance, perhaps 150 meters away. So close. The door was locked, but she had watched the guards use the keypad enough times to memorize the code. Her fingers trembled as she entered the numbers. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Katina slipped outside into the cool November air, and for one breathless moment, she felt something she had not felt in half a year. Possibility. The garden paths wound through manicured hedges and flower beds, the fountain in the distance marking her destination. She could see the wall beyond it, could almost imagine the vehicle waiting on the other side, Dr. Ferry's promised escape. She moved as quickly as her damaged ankle would allow, keeping to the shadows, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts. 50 meters. 40. 30. The fountain grew larger with each agonizing step. She could hear water trickling, could see the stone wall just beyond it. Then the floodlights exploded to life. The entire garden blazed with white light, so bright it turned night into artificial day. Katina froze, her hand flying up to shield her eyes, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. And then she heard the footsteps, multiple sets, converging from all directions. Did you really think I would not know? Fabio's voice cut through the night, calm and cold as winter frost. Did you truly believe you could move through my home without my knowledge? He emerged from the shadows near the conservatory, flanked by 4 guards. He was dressed casually in dark slacks and a fitted shirt, his hair still perfectly styled despite the late hour. But it was his eyes that made Katina's blood turn to ice. They held no anger, no surprise, only the satisfied calculation of a predator who had allowed his prey to run just far enough to make the capture more satisfying. The doctor, Katina whispered, understanding flooding through her with sickening clarity. You knew she would try to help me. Of course I knew. Fabio moved toward her with unhurried steps, and Katina stumbled backward, her ankle giving out. She fell hard onto the stone path, pain exploding through her leg. Dr. Ferry is precisely the type of idealistic fool who cannot resist playing hero. I selected her specifically because I knew she would reach out to you. And you, predictable as always, took the bait. He crouched down beside her, his hand gripping her chin with bruising force. There is no vehicle waiting. There is no escape. There is only this. He gestured to the villa, to the walls, to the guards surrounding them. This is your reality, Katina. The sooner you accept that, the less you will suffer. Tears of rage and betrayal burned down Katina's cheeks. What did you do to her? To Dr. Ferry? Nothing yet. She is being watched, of course. If she proves troublesome, well, he shrugged. Doctors have accidents too, but that is not your concern anymore. Your concern is understanding the consequences of betrayal. He stood and gestured to his guards. 2 of them hauled Katina to her feet, her ankles screaming as they dragged her not toward the villa, but toward a different structure. The old wine cellar built into the hillside at the property's edge. Underground. Isolated. Soundproof. No, Katina gasped, trying to fight, but her injured leg made resistance impossible. Fabio, please, I'm sorry. Please don't. He walked ahead of them, produced a key from his pocket, and unlocked the heavy wooden door. The darkness beyond yawned like a mouth. You will remain here until you remember who you belong to, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Until you understand that every breath you take is a privilege I grant you. Until you are ready to be perfect at the Marconi Gala tomorrow night. The guard threw her inside. She landed hard on the cold stone floor, her ankle twisting again, fresh agony radiating up her leg. The door slammed shut, and she heard the heavy lock engage, the sound of Fabio's footsteps retreating. Then there was only darkness. Complete, absolute, suffocating darkness, and the sound of her own ragged breathing echoing off stone walls as she curled into herself on the floor, her phone still tucked uselessly in her waistband, her last desperate bid for freedom crushed beneath Fabio Fiorentini's calculated cruelty. Time lost all meaning in the wine cellar. Without light, without sound except for the distant drip of water somewhere in the depths, Katina could not tell if minutes or hours had passed. Her ankle throbbed with a vicious intensity that made her stomach roil. The cold from the stone floor seeped in her bones, and she shivered uncontrollably despite her sweater. She had failed. Dr. Ferry had tried to help her, and Katina had walked straight into Fabio's trap like a fool. Now she was buried alive in this tomb, and the doctor was probably being watched, threatened, or worse. The Marconi Gala was tonight. Fabio would come for her eventually, would drag her out of this darkness and force her to stand beside him on her shattered ankle, his perfect accessory, his proof of absolute control. The despair was so complete, so suffocating, that at first she thought the vibration against her hip was a hallucination. But then it came again. The phone. The burner phone was buzzing silently in her waistband. With trembling fingers, she pulled it out. The screen's pale glow was blinding in the absolute darkness, and she had to squint against it. A new message, from a same contact, labeled F. Her heart hammered as she opened it. I know what happened. I know he trapped you. This was always a possibility. He is arrogant, but not stupid. Listen carefully. The first attempt was necessary to map his response protocols. Now we know his patterns. Now we plan the real extraction. My partner is already in position. Former special operations. He has extracted targets from worse situations than this. Tomorrow, 11 p.m., during the gala, the villa will be full of guests. Security will be spread thin. He will breach your location and get you out. When you hear 3 knocks followed by 2, that is him. Trust no one else. Be ready. This time it will work. LF. Katina read the message twice, her mind struggling to process what it was saying. The first escape attempt had been deliberate, a test to see how Fabio would react. Dr. Ferry had known it might fail, had anticipated the trap, and had planned for it. Before she could fully absorb this, another message appeared. This one was from a different number, unsaved. Katina, my name is irrelevant. What matters is that I am very good at getting people out of places they are not supposed to leave. Dr. Ferry showed in your medical scans. She showed me what he is doing to you. I have spent 12 years extracting assets from hostile territory. You are now my asset. I will come for you during the gala when Fiorentini is distracted and his security is focused on protecting his guests, not monitoring his basement. When you hear my knock pattern, 3 then 2, move away from the door. I will breach with controlled explosive. Stay low. Follow my instructions exactly. No questions, no hesitation. I will carry you if necessary. Trust that I have done this before. Trust that I will not leave you behind. Stand by. The message was clinical, precise, utterly devoid of emotion. But something about its confidence, its absolute certainty, made something kindle in Katina's chest. This was not false hope. This was not a naive doctor trying to help. This was a professional, someone who spoke about breaching doors and extracting assets as casually as others discussed the weather. A third message appeared. Delete these messages. Hide the phone somewhere on your person where it cannot be easily found if you're searched. When they come to retrieve you for the gala, comply completely. Give Fiorentini no reason to increase security. Act defeated. Let him think he has broken you. The more complacent he becomes, the easier my job becomes. You have survived 6 months of captivity. You could survive 18 more hours. I will see you tomorrow night. LF. Katina's hands shook so violently, she almost dropped the phone. 18 hours. She had 18 hours to maintain the illusion of defeat, to let Fabio believe he had crushed her spirit completely. 18 hours to prepare for a military-style extraction by a man whose name she did not even know. She deleted the messages, each word disappearing from the screen but burning itself into her memory. Then she turned off the phone to conserve its battery and tucked it deep into her sports bra, the only place she could think of where guards might hesitate to search thoroughly. The darkness pressed in around her again, but it felt different now. Less like a tomb and more like the silence before a storm. Somewhere beyond these walls, Dr. Lena Ferry and her mysterious partner were planning an operation to pull her out of Fabio Fiorentini's fortress. Katina pressed her back against the cold stone wall and forced herself to breathe slowly, to calm her racing heart, to conserve her strength. Her ankle was destroyed. Her body was exhausted. But her will, that fierce core of defiance that 6 months of captivity had not quite extinguished, flared back to life. Tomorrow night, during the Marconi Gala, while Fabio paraded his power before the city's elite, someone was coming for her. Someone who breached doors and extracted assets, and spoke with the cold confidence of a man who did not fail. All she had to do was survive until then. All she had to do was endure 18 more hours in this darkness, and then trust a stranger to carry her to freedom. It was the most dangerous gamble of her life, but it was also the only chance she had left. The hours in the wine cellar stretched like years. Katina drifted in and out of consciousness her body shutting down from cold and pain and exhaustion. When the door finally opened, flooding the space with blinding light, she could not tell if it had been 10 hours or 20. Two guards hauled her out without speaking, dragging her back toward the villa as her ankle screamed in protest. Maria was waiting in her room with clothes already laid out. A midnight blue gown, elegant and floor-length, designed to hide the compression bandage wrapped uselessly around her destroyed ankle. The housekeeper's hands were gentle but efficient as she helped Katina wash the dirt from her skin, as she pinned her chestnut hair into an elaborate updo, as she applied makeup to hide the hollows beneath her eyes. "You must be perfect tonight, Signorina," Maria whispered, and there was something in her voice that might have been sympathy or might have been warning. "He is watching very closely." By 8 o'clock, the villa had transformed. Guests arrived in expensive cars, their laughter and conversation filling the halls that had been Katina's prison. Politicians, businessmen, socialites, all of them moving through Fabio's domain with champagne glasses and false smiles, none of them knowing what darkness lived beneath the gilded surface. Fabio came to collect her at 9. He looked magnificent in his tailored tuxedo, his slicked back hair perfect, his steel blue eyes cold as they assessed her appearance. "You will stand beside me," he said, offering his arm as if she had a choice. "You will smile, you will be gracious, and you will not limp. Do you understand?" "Yes," Katina whispered, because what else could she say? He led her down to the grand ballroom, where the Marconi Gala was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead. A string quartet played in the corner. Servers moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and canapes. And Katina stood at Fabio's side, her weight carefully balanced on her good leg, her face composed into a mask of serene contentment, while her ankle felt like it was being torn apart from the inside. The minutes crawled past. 10 o'clock. 10:30. Fabio introduced her to important men whose names she did not retain, whose hands she shook with practiced grace. She smiled until her face hurt. She nodded at appropriate moments. And all the while, she waited. At 10:55, the lights went out. Not flickering, not dimming. Complete, instantaneous blackness that plunged the entire villa into chaos. Guests gasped and shrieked. Glass shattered as someone dropped their champagne. And in the darkness, Katina heard Fabio's voice bark orders to his guards, heard feet running in multiple directions, heard the backup generator failing to engage. Someone grabbed her arm, not roughly, but with absolute certainty. A voice spoke directly into her ear, low and controlled. 3 knocks, 2 knocks. I'm your ride. Stay close. Before she could process what was happening, she was being pulled through the darkness, away from Fabio's reaching hands, away from the ballroom's chaos. The man moved with the confidence of someone who could see in pitch black, navigating the villa's corridors with precision that suggested he had memorized every detail. They reached a stairwell. Katina's ankle gave out completely, and she would have fallen if the man had not caught her. Without hesitation, he lifted her, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back, and continued moving at a speed that should have been impossible while carrying another person. "Wine cellar?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she gasped. Figures. Dramatic bastard. They descended into the darkness of the lower level just as the backup generator finally kicked in overhead. Emergency lighting flickered to life in hallways above them. But down here there was still only blackness. The man produced a small flashlight from somewhere, its red-filtered beam barely providing enough light to see. The wine cellar door came into view. Behind them, Katina could hear shouts, could hear Fabio's voice rising above the others, demanding to know where she was, ordering every exit sealed. They were out of time. The man set her down carefully against the wall. "Cover your ears. Close your eyes. Mouth open to equalize pressure." Katina obeyed without question. There was a sharp crack, a flash of heat, and then the wine cellar door exploded inward. Before the smoke cleared, he had her in his arms again and was moving through the cellar toward what looked like a solid stone wall. "Service tunnel," he explained, his tone conversational despite the alarms now shrieking through the villa. "Prohibition era. These old estates always have them." He pressed something, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage beyond. They plunged into the tunnel. Behind them, Katina heard guards flooding into the wine cellar, heard Fabio's roar of rage that shook the foundations. But they were already moving through the passage, the man's flashlight cutting through absolute darkness, his breathing steady despite carrying her weight. The tunnel opened into a drainage culvert that led under the villa's perimeter wall. They emerged into the woods beyond, where a black SUV waited with its engine already running. Dr. Lena Ferry sat in the driver's seat, her face pale but determined. The man deposited Katina in the back seat, then climbed in beside her. "Go. Now." The SUV lurched forward just as gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets pinged off the armored vehicle as Dr. Ferry accelerated through the woods, following what must have been a pre-planned route. Behind them, through the rear window, Katina could see lights blazing to life across Fabio's villa, could see figures pouring out into the grounds. But they were already too far away. The SUV hit the main road, and Dr. Ferry drove with the precision of someone who had practiced this escape route 100 times. Within minutes, the villa disappeared behind trees, and they were speeding through the November night towards somewhere Fabio Fiorentini could not follow. Katina looked at the man beside her for the first time in actual light. He was maybe 40, with weathered features and the kind of calm that came from years of doing impossible things. He met her eyes and nodded once. "You're safe now," he said simply. "Let's get that ankle fixed." And for the first time in 6 months, Katina believed that freedom might actually be possible. She woke to the antiseptic smell of a medical facility and the steady beep of monitors. For one terrifying moment, she thought she was back at the villa, that the escape had been a fever dream conjured by her desperate mind. But then her eyes focused on the room around her, and she knew this was different. The walls were plain white concrete, not marble. The bed was standard hospital issue, not a gilded cage. And sitting in a chair beside her, dark circles under her eyes, but very much alive, was Dr. Lena Ferry. "Welcome back," the doctor said softly, setting aside the tablet she had been reading. "You've been out for about 14 hours. The surgery went well, all things considered." Katina tried to speak, but her throat was raw from the breathing tube. Dr. Ferry held a cup of water with a straw to her lips, and she drank gratefully. "Where am I?" "A private facility. Very private. The kind of place that doesn't ask questions and doesn't keep records that can be subpoenaed." Dr. Ferry pulled her chair closer. "I repaired 3 fractures in your ankle, reconstructed 2 torn ligaments, and removed several bone fragments. You'll need extensive physical therapy, but you will walk again. Properly, without pain." Tears burned in Katina's eyes, and this time she did not fight them. 6 months of holding everything inside, 6 months of swallowing her fear and rage and despair, and now it all came pouring out in silent sobs that shook her shoulders. Dr. Ferry took her hand and held it, saying nothing, letting her break apart in safety. When Katina finally regained control, she wiped her face with the back of her hand. "The man who extracted me. I never got his name. He prefers it that way, but he's here if you want to meet him properly." As if summoned, the door opened and the extractor entered, looking far less intense in daylight than he had in the chaos of the escape. He wore jeans and a plain gray shirt, and he carried a thick folder under one arm. He pulled up a second chair and sat down with the ease of someone who had spent considerable time in hospitals. "Feeling better?" he asked. "I'm alive," Katina said. "That's more than I expected. Good baseline." He set the folder on the table beside her bed. "Dr. Ferry told me your story, what you witnessed, what Fiorentini did to you. I've spent the last 2 weeks gathering evidence. Financial records, surveillance footage, testimony from people he thought he controlled absolutely. It's all here." Katina stared at the folder. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we have enough to put Fabio Fiorentini away for the rest of his life. Money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, unlawful imprisonment, witness intimidation. The prosecutor I work with has been building a case against him for 3 years. You are the missing piece, the witness who can tie everything together." "You work with a prosecutor?" Katina's head spun. "Who are you?" "Someone who gets paid to take down men like Fiorentini." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "But I need you to understand what I'm asking. If you testify, you will be in protective custody for months, maybe longer. You will have to relive everything that happened to you in front of judges and lawyers and possibly a jury. Fabio will do everything in his considerable power to discredit you, to intimidate you, to make you recant. It will be the hardest thing you have ever done. And if I don't testify?" Katina asked quietly. "Then Dr. Ferry gets you new identification, a new life somewhere far away. You disappear. You heal. You move on. Fabio continues operating with impunity, and whoever he hurts next won't have anyone to save them." The room fell silent except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Katina looked from the extractor to Dr. Ferry, whose dark eyes held nothing but compassion. "I was supposed to take an oath too," Dr. Ferry said softly. "To do no harm. When Fabio forced me to falsify your medical report, when he made me complicit in your suffering, I broke that oath. I couldn't live with myself if I let it stand. That's why I contacted my friend here. That's why we planned your extraction. Because some things are worth risking everything for." Katina looked down at her bandaged ankle, at the 4 lines in her arm, at the evidence of care and precision that Dr. Ferry had shown her. She thought about the scarred man who had broken her ankle, about Fabio's cold eyes as he locked her in darkness, about her father turning away, about Luca's gunshot in the night. She thought about all the other women who might be trapped, who might be hurt, who might have no one willing to risk everything to save them. "I'll testify," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I'll tell them everything, every detail, every lie, every moment of what he did to me." The extractor nodded once, something like approval flickering across his weathered face. "Then we start preparing tomorrow. For now, rest. Heal. You've got a long road ahead." He stood and left the room, taking the folder with him. Dr. Ferry squeezed Katina's hand once more before rising. "I'll be here through your recovery," the doctor said. "Every step. You won't face this alone." As Dr. Ferry left and the room settled into quiet, Katina closed her eyes and felt something she had not felt in 6 months. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Purpose. The chance to transform her suffering into justice. The opportunity to ensure that Fabio Fiorentini's empire of control and cruelty would finally crumble. It would not be easy. It would not be safe. But it would be her choice. Her voice. Her testimony that would help bring him down. And that, she thought as sleep began to pull her under again, was worth any risk. 4 months later, Katina stood in the corridor outside courtroom 7 of the Milan Criminal Court, her weight balanced evenly on both legs for the first time since the assault. The physical therapy had been brutal, every session pushing her rebuilt ankle to its limits and beyond. But Dr. Ferry had been there through all of it, steady and encouraging, and now Katina could walk without limping, could stand without pain, could reclaim the athleticism that had once defined her. The extractor, whose name she had finally learned was Marcus, stood beside her in a dark suit that made him look almost respectable. "Last chance to change your mind," he said, though his tone suggested he already knew her answer. "I'm not changing my mind." The courtroom doors opened, and Katina walked inside with her head high. The room was packed with journalists, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and spectators who had waited months for this trial. And there, at the defense table, sat Fabio Fiorentini. He looked diminished somehow, despite his expensive suit and perfectly styled hair. 4 months in custody awaiting trial had stripped away some of the commanding presence that had once terrified her. But when his steel blue eyes met hers across the courtroom, she saw the same cold calculation, the same absolute certainty that he would win, that he always won. Katina did not look away. She took the witness stand and placed her hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. And then, for the next 6 hours, she did exactly that. She told them about the night she witnessed Councilman Ricci's murder. She described her abduction, her imprisonment, the suffocating surveillance and control. She recounted the assault in the stairwell, the sound of her ankle breaking, Fabio's order to falsify the medical report. She explained the wine cellar, the darkness, the psychological torture of being buried alive while he prepared to parade her at a gala on shattered bones. The defense attorney tried to break her, suggesting she had been a willing companion, that she was lying for attention or money or revenge. But Katina had prepared for this with Marcus and the prosecution team. She met every question with calm, detailed answers. She provided dates, times, names. She described the layout of the villa with such precision that the jury could see it in their minds. And when the defense attorney held up a photograph of her at one of Fabio's events, smiling beside him, and asked why she looked so happy if she was truly a prisoner, Katina looked directly at the jury. "That is what survival looks like," she said quietly. "When a man holds absolute power over your life, when he has demonstrated he will kill without hesitation, when he controls every person around you through fear, you learn to smile. You learn to play the role he demands. Because the alternative is death. That photograph is not evidence of my consent. It is evidence of my fear." The courtroom fell silent. When Katina finally stepped down from the witness stand, her legs trembling from exhaustion, she caught a glimpse of Fabio's face. For the first time since she had known him, his expression had cracked. He looked like a man watching his empire crumble, watching his carefully constructed veneer of legitimacy shatter beyond repair. The trial continued for 3 more weeks, but the outcome was never in doubt after Katina's testimony. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all charges. Fabio Fiorentini was sentenced to 45 years in prison without possibility of parole. Katina was not in the courtroom when the sentence was read. She was already gone, already beginning the next chapter of her life. She found Dr. Lena Ferry waiting outside the safe house where she had been staying, leaning against her car with 2 cups of coffee and a smile that had become increasingly familiar over the months of recovery. They had grown close during the endless hours of physical therapy and trial preparation, their relationship evolving from doctor and patient into something deeper, something built on mutual respect and shared trauma and the kind of trust that only comes from risking everything together. "It's over," Katina said, taking one of the coffee cups. "No," Dr. Ferry replied gently. "It's just beginning." They drove north together, away from Milan, away from courtrooms and memories and the shadow of Fabio's villa. Katina had been accepted into a graduate program in sports medicine, a chance to transform her athletic background into something that could help others heal. Dr. Ferry had taken a position at a university hospital in the same city, leaving behind her private practice to work with underserved communities. As they crossed into the mountains and the city disappeared behind them, Katina rolled down her window and let the cool air wash over her face. She was 28 years old, and she was free, truly free, not running, not hiding, but choosing her own path forward. She had survived 6 months of captivity. She had endured a shattered ankle and psychological torture. She had risked everything to testify, to speak truth to power, to ensure that Fabio Fiorentini would never hurt anyone again. And now, with the woman who had saved her life sitting beside her and an open road stretching ahead, Katina Pisano was finally, completely, beautifully free to become whoever she chose to be. The last word had been hers after all.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.